On November 3, 2014, a 21-year-old university student named Layla Hamadi walked into a Starbucks near the Sorbonne in Paris's Latin Quarter, ordered a caramel macchiato, and sat down at a corner table to study for her economics midterm. She had no idea that 3 men sitting in a gray Peugeot parked across the street had been following her for the past 11 days. She had no idea that her apartment had been entered and searched twice while she attended lectures. And she had no idea that her father, a man she believed worked in international shipping logistics, was actually one of Hezbollah's most important arms procurement specialists, responsible for moving weapons from Eastern Europe into Lebanon through a network that had operated successfully for nearly a decade. This is the story of how Israeli intelligence turned a father's love for his daughter into the vulnerability that would bring down an entire arms trafficking operation. It's a story about surveillance, about the lengths intelligence agencies will go to track their targets, and about how the most dangerous people in the world can be undone by the ordinary details of family life. Stay with this story, because by the end, you'll understand exactly how a university student's coffee habit, her choice of friends, and a single phone call home would lead to one of Mossad's most significant operations against Hezbollah weapons networks in the past 2 decades. The Mossad officers watching Layla Hamadi that November afternoon weren't interested in her. They were interested in her father, Rasheed Hamadi, a man who had been on Israeli intelligence watch lists since 2009, when his name first appeared in intercepted communications between Hezbollah operatives in Beirut and weapons suppliers in Bulgaria. Rasheed Hamadi was 53 years old in 2014, a Lebanese national who traveled frequently between Beirut, Sofia, Brussels, and several other European cities under the cover of operating a small import-export business. His company appeared entirely legitimate. It had been registered in Cyprus in 2007, maintained offices in Beirut and Sofia, filed tax returns, employed a small staff, and conducted routine commercial transactions. But Israeli intelligence had been tracking the company since 2010, and what they discovered was that buried within legitimate shipments were carefully concealed weapons components. Anti-tank missiles, advanced communication equipment, night vision devices, ammunition, everything Hezbollah needed to maintain its military capabilities in southern Lebanon. The operation was sophisticated. Rasheed worked with suppliers in Bulgaria, Serbia, and Ukraine, countries where corruption made it possible to purchase military equipment. The weapons would be broken down, hidden inside legitimate cargo, shipped through multiple countries to obscure their origin, and eventually moved into Lebanon through Syria or Mediterranean ports where Hezbollah had influence.
Israeli military intelligence had documented at least 7 major weapon shipments that they believed Rasheed had facilitated between 2010 and 2014. The shipments included Russian-made Kornet anti-tank missiles, SA-7 surface-to-air missiles, advanced sniper rifles, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. But knowing that Rasheed Hamadi was facilitating weapon shipments and proving it were 2 different things. Rasheed was careful. He never personally handled weapons. He never visited the transfer points. He communicated through encrypted messaging and burner phones. He met suppliers in public places where surveillance would be difficult. Israeli intelligence had tried multiple approaches to get close to him. They'd attempted to recruit sources within his network, but Rasheed worked with a small, trusted circle. They'd considered direct action, but Rasheed rarely left Lebanon, and when he did travel to Europe, he moved quickly and maintained security protocols. By mid-2014, the Mossad team assigned to track Rasheed Hamadi had reached a frustrating standstill. They knew what he was doing, but couldn't get close enough to gather the evidence they needed. Then in August 2014, something changed. Israeli signals intelligence intercepted a phone call from Rasheed to his wife in Beirut. The call dealt with family matters, nothing about weapons, but Rasheed mentioned that he was proud their daughter had been accepted to study economics at the Sorbonne in Paris. He said she would be moving there in September. Write in the comments what city you're watching us from. The information about Layla Hamadi reached the Mossad's research division, the analytical branch responsible for identifying operational opportunities, within 24 hours of the intercept. The analysis was straightforward. Rasheed Hamadi, a high-value target who had proven nearly impossible to surveil or compromise, had a daughter who would be living alone in Paris, away from the security and surveillance environment of Beirut, away from Hezbollah's protective apparatus. She would be vulnerable in ways her father wasn't. And more importantly, she would almost certainly maintain regular contact with him, because that's what families do, especially when a daughter is living abroad for the first time. The operational proposal that emerged from this analysis was simple but potentially very effective. Put Layla under surveillance in Paris, document her routines, her relationships, her communications with her father, and use that information to build a more complete picture of Rasheed's movements and activities. If they could establish when and how Rasheed and Layla communicated, they might be able to intercept those communications and extract intelligence about his operations. If they could identify times when Rasheed planned to visit Layla in Paris, they would have advance warning and could plan operations accordingly.
The proposal went up the chain of command in Israeli intelligence, eventually reaching the desk of the Mossad's director, who approved the operation with specific parameters. The surveillance of Layla Hamadi would be conducted by a small team, no more than 6 officers, operating under diplomatic cover in Paris. They would not make contact with her, would not attempt to recruit her, and would not take any action that might alert her or her father to the surveillance. This was strictly an intelligence gathering operation, designed to be invisible and sustainable over a long period. The team was assembled in early September 2014. The lead officer was a woman named Maya Katz, 38 years old, a veteran of Mossad operations in Europe who spoke fluent French and had extensive experience conducting urban surveillance. Her cover was as a cultural attaché at the Israeli embassy in Paris. The rest of the team consisted of 5 officers, 3 men and 2 women, all with various diplomatic or commercial covers that allowed them to operate freely in France. By September 15th, when Layla Hamadi arrived in Paris and moved into a small studio apartment in the 5th arrondissement near the Pantheon, the Mossad team was already in position, ready to begin what they expected would be a months-long surveillance operation. Layla was easy to follow. She had never received any security training, had no reason to believe anyone would be watching her, and followed predictable patterns that made surveillance straightforward. She attended classes at the Sorbonne 4 days a week, usually arriving around 9 in the morning and leaving in the late afternoon. She studied at the same Starbucks near the university 2 or 3 times a week. She bought groceries at a Monoprix supermarket 2 blocks from her apartment every Saturday morning. She had made friends with several other students in her program, and she would occasionally meet them for dinner or drinks in the evenings, but mostly she kept to herself, focused on her studies, adjusting to life in a new city. The surveillance team documented everything. They photographed everyone she met, everyone she spoke to, looking for any indication that she might be in contact with her father's network, or that someone might be watching her on behalf of Hezbollah. They found nothing suspicious. Layla appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a 21-year-old student navigating the challenges of university life in a foreign country. The more interesting intelligence came from monitoring her communications with her father. The Mossad's technical team had installed monitoring equipment in Layla's apartment during a black bag operation conducted on September 20th while she was attending classes. 2 officers peeked the lock on her apartment door, entered quickly, and spent 43 minutes installing miniature listening devices in her bedroom and living area, along with software on her laptop that would allow them to monitor her internet activity and record her Skype calls. The operation was clean. Nothing was disturbed. Layla never knew anyone had been inside. Over the following weeks, the surveillance team learned that Layla spoke to her father by phone approximately 3 times per week, usually in the evenings Paris time. The calls were affectionate and mundane. Rasheed would ask about her classes, her apartment, whether she was eating properly, whether she felt safe. Layla would tell him about her professors, about the difficulty of studying economics in French, about the friends she was making. They talked about family news, about Layla's younger brother who was still in high school in Beirut, about her mother's health. There was never any discussion of weapons, Hezbollah, or anything related to Rasheed's actual work. But what made these calls valuable to Israeli intelligence wasn't their content, it was their timing and frequency. By monitoring when Rasheed called Layla, the Mossad team could establish patterns in his schedule and location. Calls made in the early evening Paris time, which was late evening in Beirut, usually came when Rasheed was at home. Calls made at unusual hours, or calls that were briefer than normal, often indicated that Rasheed was traveling. By cross-referencing the timing of these calls with other intelligence sources, flight manifests, hotel records, border crossings, the analysts in Tel Aviv began to build a more detailed picture of Rasheed's movements. On October 8th, during one of their regular phone conversations, Rasheed told Layla that he would be coming to visit her in Paris in early November. He said he had business meetings in Brussels and would take the train down to Paris afterward to spend a few days with her. He asked her to suggest some restaurants they could visit together and some sights she wanted to show him. For Layla, it was exciting news. She missed her father and was eager to show him her new life in Paris. For the Mossad surveillance team listening to the call, it was the opportunity they had been waiting for. If Rasheed Hamadi was coming to Paris, they would have him in an environment where they could conduct intensive surveillance, where they could track his movements, identify his contacts, and potentially gather the evidence they needed to understand and disrupt his weapons network. If you're finding this story interesting, hit that subscribe button and give us a like. It helps us bring you more stories like this one. Maya Katz, the team leader, immediately sent an encrypted message to Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, informing them of Rasheed's planned visit to Paris. The response came back within hours. This was now a priority operation.
Additional resources would be deployed to Paris. The surveillance of Rasheed during his visit would be comprehensive. Every meeting, every phone call, Every person he contacted would be documented. The goal was not just to surveil Rasheed while he was in Paris, but to use this visit as a starting point for identifying his entire network, from the weapon suppliers he worked with in Eastern Europe, to the couriers who moved the shipments, to the Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon who received them. Over the next 3 weeks, as Rasheed's visit approached, the Mossad team prepared meticulously. They identified the hotels near Layla's apartment where Rasheed might stay and made arrangements to monitor those locations. They coordinated with Israeli embassy personnel to ensure that additional surveillance officers would be available when needed. They worked with the technical team to prepare equipment for tracking Rasheed's phone and potentially placing a GPS tracker on any vehicle he used. On November 3rd, the day the story opened with Layla sitting in Starbucks studying for her exam, the surveillance team was conducting what they called a routine day of monitoring, documenting her movements and listening for any communications that might provide advanced details about her father's visit. What they didn't know yet was that Rasheed's plans had changed. At approximately 6:15 that evening, while Layla was back in her apartment making dinner, her phone rang. It was her father. The surveillance team, monitoring the call in real time from a rented apartment 3 buildings away, immediately began recording. Rasheed's voice sounded tense, different from his usual warm tone during their conversations. He told Layla that he wouldn't be able to visit her in early November as planned. He said something had come up with work, an urgent situation that required him to be in Sofia instead. He apologized repeatedly, said he knew she was disappointed, and promised he would reschedule the visit as soon as possible. Layla was clearly upset. Her voice wavered as she asked him when he thought he might be able to come. Rasheed said he wasn't sure, maybe in a few weeks, maybe before the end of the year. The call lasted less than 5 minutes and ended with Rasheed telling Layla he loved her and would call her again soon. The Mossad team listening to the call recognized immediately that something had changed in Rasheed's situation. His sudden cancellation of a trip he'd been planning for weeks suggested either a genuine operational emergency or possibly that he'd become aware of surveillance. Maya Katz reported the development to Tel Aviv and requested guidance on whether to maintain the surveillance of Layla or shift resources elsewhere. The response from headquarters was clear: maintain the surveillance, continue monitoring Layla's communications with her father.
The cancellation might mean nothing, or it might be significant, but either way, Layla remained their best source of intelligence on Rasheed's activities and movements. What the Mossad didn't know at that moment was that Rasheed's cancellation had nothing to do with awareness of Israeli surveillance. It had everything to do with a major weapons deal that was coming together faster than expected, a deal that would require Rasheed's presence in Bulgaria to coordinate the details. Over the next November and into December, the surveillance of Layla continued. The phone calls with her father became less frequent, dropping from 3 times per week to once or twice. When they did speak, Rasheed sounded distracted, often cutting conversations short because he said he was busy with work. The Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv, reviewing the transcripts of these calls and cross-referencing them with other intelligence, began to suspect that Rasheed was involved in something significant. The pattern of his communications, the reduction in contact with his daughter, the vague references to being busy, all suggested an operational tempo that indicated a major deal in progress. In early December, Israeli signals intelligence intercepted an encrypted message between 2 known Hezbollah operatives in Beirut. The message, once decrypted, referenced a shipment of special equipment that was being prepared for transport and that would arrive before the end of the year. The message didn't mention Rasheed by name, but the timing and context suggested it was related to his network. On December 9th, during one of her routine phone calls with her father, Lane mentioned that her fall semester exams were finishing on December 20th, and she would be flying home to Beirut for the winter break on December 22nd. She said she was excited to see the family and asked if her father would be home for Christmas. Rasheed told her he would definitely be there. He said he was looking forward to spending time with her and that he had been working hard on a big project that should be finished by then. He sounded more relaxed than he had in weeks, and the call lasted longer than recent conversations, with Rasheed asking detailed questions about her exams and her plans for the break. For the Mossad team monitoring the call, Rasheed's mention of a big project finishing soon was significant. It correlated with the intercepted message about a shipment arriving before year's end. It suggested that whatever operation Rasheed had been focused on was reaching its conclusion. Maya Katz sent an urgent assessment to Tel Aviv, arguing that if Rasheed was facilitating a major weapons shipment, it was likely happening in the next 2 weeks, and that this might be their best opportunity to identify the shipment route and intercept it before it reached Hezbollah. The response from Mossad headquarters approved an expansion of the operation.
Additional intelligence resources would be deployed to monitor Rasheed's known associates in Bulgaria and to track cargo shipments from Eastern Europe to the Middle East. The goal was to identify the specific shipment Rasheed was handling and to gather enough evidence to either intercept it or to provide intelligence to European authorities that would allow them to seize it. On December 14th, Israeli intelligence monitoring shipping manifests and cargo tracking systems identified a container shipment that matched their target profile. The container had been loaded in Varna, Bulgaria, on December 12th, listed as containing agricultural machinery bound for a company in Latakia, Syria. The company in Latakia was a known front for Hezbollah logistics operations. The container was scheduled to be transported by ship to Latakia, arriving on December 19th. This was almost certainly the shipment. The timing matched Rasheed's reference to a project finishing soon. The route matched the pattern of previous weapon shipments the Mossad had tracked through Rasheed's network. The listed contents, agricultural machinery, matched the cover story typically used to conceal military equipment. Now the question was how to confirm the contents and how to intercept it. Israeli intelligence had several options. They could share the information with Bulgarian authorities and request that the container be inspected before it left Varna, but that carried risks. Bulgarian cooperation with Israeli intelligence was inconsistent, and there was concern that alerting local authorities might tip off Rasheed's network. They could attempt to inspect the container themselves, sending a Mossad team to Varna to conduct a covert examination, but that was logistically complex and carried significant risk of exposure. Or they could wait until the container arrived in Latakia and conduct an operation there, but that would mean the weapons were already in Syria, already in Hezbollah's operational area, making interdiction much more difficult. The decision was made at the highest levels of Israeli government, involving not just Mossad but also military intelligence and political leadership. Israel would share intelligence about the suspected weapon shipment with European authorities, specifically with Europol and with French intelligence, in a way that would allow European law enforcement to take action without revealing the source of the intelligence. The approach was indirect but effective. On December 16th, French intelligence received information from a confidential source, actually Israeli intelligence through a liaison channel, indicating that a specific container currently in transit from Bulgaria to Syria might contain illegal weapons. The information included the container number, the ship's name, and the scheduled route. French authorities working with Europol requested that Bulgarian customs officials inspect the container before it departed Varna.
On December 17th, Bulgarian customs inspectors, acting on the request from European authorities, opened the container at the port of Varna. Inside, hidden within crates labeled as irrigation equipment, they found 73 anti-tank missiles, 42 advanced sniper rifles, 15 crates of ammunition, and 12 sets of night vision equipment. The discovery was significant enough that it made international news. Bulgarian authorities announced they had seized a major weapon shipment believed to be destined for militants in the Middle East. They arrested 2 Bulgarian nationals who had been involved in loading the container and began an investigation into the smuggling network. In Beirut, Rasheed Hamadi learned about the seizure the same day it happened. His reaction, according to later intelligence gathered by Mossad, was controlled panic. He knew immediately that the operation had been compromised, but he didn't know how. He began the process of shutting down connections, destroying records, warning his associates to cease communications. But he made one critical mistake. On the evening of December 17th, Rasheed called his daughter in Paris. Layla was in her apartment studying for her last exam when her phone rang. The Mossad surveillance team was monitoring as always. Rasheed's voice on the call was strained. He told Layla that he needed her to do something for him. He said it was urgent and important. He asked her to go to a specific address in Paris the next day, a small electronics repair shop in the 11th arrondissement. He told her to ask for a man named Karim and to tell him that her father needed him to call a specific number as soon as possible. He gave her the number and made her repeat it back to him to ensure she had it correct. Layla, confused by the request and by her father's tense tone, asked what this was about. Rasheed told her it was just business, something that couldn't wait, and that he needed her help because his regular contacts were unavailable. He told her not to worry, just to deliver the message, and then to forget about it. The call ended, and Layla sat in her apartment, uncertain about what her father had asked her to do, but feeling obligated to help him. She wrote down the address and the phone number he'd given her, and decided she would go to the electronics shop the next afternoon after her exam. For the Mossad surveillance team, the call was a breakthrough. Rasheed had just used his daughter as a courier to deliver an urgent message to someone in his network. The address he'd given her was now a confirmed location connected to his operations. The person named Karim was now an identified target. And the phone number Rasheed wanted Karim to call was now a valuable piece of intelligence that could lead to other members of the network. Maya Katz immediately reported the development to Tel Aviv and requested permission to follow Layla to the electronics shop and to identify Karim.
Permission was granted with explicit instructions that Layla was not to be approached or alerted to the surveillance under any circumstances. On the afternoon of December 18th,
Layla took the metro to the 11th arrondissement and walked to the address her father had given her. The Mossad surveillance team followed her, with 2 officers on foot maintaining visual contact and 3 others positioned in vehicles nearby. The electronics shop was a small storefront tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner on a busy commercial street. The sign above the door read Réparation électronique in faded letters. Layla entered the shop, and the surveillance team waited outside, unable to hear what was said, but photographing the interior through the shop's front window. Inside, according to what Layla would later tell her father in a phone call that evening, she asked for Karim and was directed to a man in his 40s working at a repair bench in the back of the shop. She delivered her father's message, telling Karim that he needed to call a specific number as soon as possible. Karim nodded, wrote down the number, and thanked her. The entire interaction lasted less than 3 minutes. Layla left the shop and returned to her apartment, her task completed. The Mossad surveillance team now had what they needed. They had identified Karim, whose full name they would later determine through French records was Karim Nasser, a 43-year-old Lebanese national who had been living in Paris since 2008. They had the phone number Rasheed wanted Karim to call, which Israeli signals intelligence would immediately begin monitoring. And they had confirmation that Rasheed's network extended into Paris, with Karim serving as some kind of coordinator or facilitator. Over the next several weeks, Israeli intelligence built a comprehensive picture of Rasheed's network by following the threads that had emerged from the surveillance of Layla. Karim Nasser became a surveillance target. The phone number Rasheed had provided was monitored and led to other contacts in Belgium, Germany, and Lebanon. The 2 Bulgarian nationals arrested in the weapon seizure were interrogated by Bulgarian authorities and provided information about their suppliers. By late January 2015, Israeli intelligence had identified 17 individuals connected to Rasheed's weapons procurement network, spanning 6 countries. They had documented the routes used to move weapons from Eastern Europe to the Middle East, the companies used as fronts, the bank accounts used to finance the operations. The information was systematically shared with European law enforcement agencies, again through liaison channels that protected Israel's sources and methods. Throughout January and February 2015, European authorities conducted a series of coordinated operations. Karim Nasser was arrested in Paris and charged with involvement in illegal weapons trafficking. 3 associates in Belgium were arrested.
2 suppliers in Bulgaria were detained. Bank accounts were frozen. Shell companies were shut down. The network that Rasheed Hamadi had built over nearly a decade was systematically dismantled. Rasheed himself remained in Lebanon, beyond the reach of European law enforcement, but aware that his operation had been completely compromised. According to intelligence gathered in the months following the arrests, he ceased all weapons procurement activities, understanding that he was now a known target and that continuing would result in immediate arrest if he traveled to Europe. Layla Hamadi returned to Paris in late January after her winter break, completely unaware of the role she had played in the operation. She never knew that her apartment had been bugged, that her phone calls with her father had been monitored, or that the simple task of delivering a message to an electronics repair shop had provided Israeli intelligence with a critical piece of the puzzle. She completed her degree at the Sorbonne in 2017 and returned to Beirut, where, according to the last available intelligence, she began working for a bank. The Mossad surveillance of her ended in March 2015, once the network had been disrupted and Rasheed was no longer actively operating. The story of how Mossad tracked Rasheed Hamadi through his daughter represents a particular type of intelligence operation that agencies rarely discuss publicly. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shootouts, no car chases, no confrontations. It was simply patient, methodical surveillance of an ordinary person whose only crime was being related to someone the intelligence community wanted to track. The operation succeeded because it exploited a fundamental human vulnerability, the desire of a father to stay connected with his daughter, to be involved in her life even when he was far away, to help her when she needed him. Rasheed Hamadi had spent years maintaining operational security, being careful about his communications, varying his routines, working only with trusted associates. But when his daughter called him from Paris, when she was living alone in a foreign city, he couldn't maintain that same level of security. He called her regularly, spoke to her openly about his plans, and ultimately, when he was under pressure, he asked her to help him by delivering a message. That single request gave Israeli intelligence everything they needed. The surveillance of Layla Hamadi also raises significant ethical questions about the boundaries of intelligence operations. Layla was not involved in her father's activities, had no knowledge of what he was doing, and was simply a university student trying to succeed in her studies.
Yet she was subjected to months of intensive surveillance, had her home entered without her knowledge, had her communications monitored, all because of her father's activities.
Israeli intelligence would argue that the Israeli surveillance was justified because it led to the disruption of a weapons network that posed a direct threat to Israeli security. The weapons Rasheed was moving into Lebanon were being used by Hezbollah, an organization committed to Israel's destruction, and stopping those weapons from reaching their destination saved lives. From that perspective, monitoring Rasheed's daughter was a necessary and proportionate response to a legitimate security threat. Critics would argue that surveillance of innocent civilians, especially one conducted without any legal authorization or oversight by French authorities, represents an overreach of intelligence powers and a violation of privacy rights. They would point out that Lila was never suspected of any crime, never given any opportunity to consent to or challenge the surveillance, and was used purely as a means to get to her father. The debate about where to draw these lines continues within intelligence communities and among policymakers and civil liberties advocates. What is clear is that as technology makes surveillance easier and more comprehensive, these ethical questions become more pressing. In the case of Rasheed Hamadi, the outcome from an Israeli perspective was unambiguously positive. A significant Hezbollah weapons procurement network was disrupted. Weapons that would have been used against Israeli soldiers and civilians were intercepted. Multiple individuals involved in illegal arms trafficking were arrested, and Israeli intelligence gained valuable information about how Hezbollah obtains weapons, information that could be used to prevent future smuggling operations. But the operation also demonstrated the extent to which intelligence agencies are willing to go to track their targets, how they will follow every thread, exploit every vulnerability, and use every tool at their disposal. In this case, that vulnerability was a father's love for his daughter and a daughter's willingness to help her father when he asked. Rasheed Hamadi's fundamental mistake was forgetting that in the world of intelligence operations, there is no such thing as a purely personal life. Every relationship, every communication, every connection is a potential vector for surveillance. He had been careful about his professional contacts, about his travel patterns, about his operational security, but he hadn't been careful enough about his family, and that was what undid him. For Maya Katz and the Mossad surveillance team, the operation represented successful intelligence work, the kind of patient, detail-oriented investigation that rarely makes headlines, but that forms the backbone of effective counterterrorism efforts. They had taken a single piece of information and turned it into a comprehensive intelligence picture that allowed them to dismantle an entire network. The case has been studied within Mossad and other intelligence agencies as an example of effective operations.
It demonstrates the importance of patience in long-term surveillance, the value of monitoring personal relationships to understand professional activities, and the need to follow every lead, no matter how tangential it might seem. For Hezbollah, the case served as a harsh lesson about the vulnerabilities created by maintaining normal family relationships while engaged in clandestine activities. After the network was disrupted, there were reports that Hezbollah issued new guidance to operatives about limiting contact with family members and being more cautious about involving relatives in any operational matters. The question of what Layla knew about her father's actual work remains unanswered. Did she believe his cover story about working in import-export business, or did she suspect that something more was going on? The surveillance transcripts suggest that Layla had no knowledge of her father's weapons smuggling activities, that she accepted his explanations at face value, and that she helped him out of family loyalty without any awareness that she was participating in something criminal. For Rasheed Hamadi, the collapse of his network in early 2015 marked the end of his career as an arms dealer. With multiple associates arrested, his methods exposed, and his name known to European law enforcement and Israeli intelligence, he could no longer operate effectively. He has remained in Lebanon since 2015, living in a Hezbollah-controlled area where he is protected from arrest by foreign authorities. The weapons seized in Varna, 73 anti-tank missiles and other military equipment, were destroyed by Bulgarian authorities. Hezbollah had paid for those weapons and had planned to use them to enhance their military capabilities. Instead, they were turned into scrap metal, representing a significant financial loss and operational setback. The dismantling of Rasheed's network also disrupted Hezbollah's weapons procurement operations more broadly. Other suppliers and facilitators, seeing what had happened to Rasheed's associates, became more cautious or withdrew from the business entirely. The routes and methods that had been used successfully for years were now known to European authorities and could no longer be used safely. From a strategic perspective, the operation against Rasheed Hamadi was one piece in a much larger campaign that Israel has waged for decades against Hezbollah's military capabilities. Israeli intelligence and military forces have worked consistently to prevent weapons from reaching the organization through various means. The surveillance of Layla Hamadi didn't end the threat from Hezbollah or fundamentally alter the balance of power, but it successfully disrupted one network, prevented one shipment from reaching its destination, and provided valuable intelligence for future operations. For Layla Hamadi, if she ever learns the full story, it would be a disturbing revelation about how her life was manipulated, how her privacy was violated, and how her trust in her father was exploited by a foreign intelligence service. So write in the comments what city you're from, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. These stories don't tell themselves, and your support helps us keep bringing them to you.